Evacuation is a concept that's not related to how many people would remain. But if you say that use the word evacuation, you still felt that the listener would understand that some people would remain. Yes, that's true. And as it says here, Mr. Terasaka was being communicated. And to put it simply, I wasn't fully sure what Mr. Shimizu wanted to communicate to me, says Mr. Terasaka. And it can be taken that he felt that you wanted to consult with him what needs to be done. I wasn't quite sure what Mr. Shimizu wanted to do, but I didn't consider that he wanted to pull out all the operators. So it could be that the same conversation could be understood in a different way from the listener compared to the speaker. What do you think? If you write these words at a later time, they have an image, but at that point, things were very imminent, urgent, so that slight connotation in expressions could result in a mismatch of the understanding as I look back. But as I have repeated, that was not our intent. We didn't think of full withdrawal. This is something that you needed to communicate the facts in a precise manner, doing a thorough job. If you communicate in a way that a listener would have a different connotation, don't you think there was a problem in how you communicated? Between the speaker and the listener, there could be a mismatch, and it might have been that there was a mismatch in this case. As I look back, it could have been that we did actually have a mismatch. Subsequent to that, as was said earlier, at 1955 or so, and within an hour, you have called the secretary of METI minister 8 times to get in touch with the minister. Why was it that you wanted to get in touch with the minister once again?
Well, talking about in the order of things, as far as this evacuation was concerned, it was after I had contacted him after that, 1841, and then 1859, there's been about 8 different phone calls made, but these were very short conversations. So I feel that you didn't have the opportunity to talk about that. But was there something else that you needed to relay to him? As far as this is concerned, my recollection is very vague. I do apologize. One of the reasons why you were not able to contact him has to do with the aide of the METI minister did say there was a phone call from TEPCO, and he said to the aide that I have already refused that call. And then if that is the case, Mr. Edano said, I think you should take that call or make that call and speak to them again. And that was something that was mentioned. And if this is the case, then you've contacted the minister, but you were not able to get through. It's because the minister had already heard from you and there was a refusal. And if there's another phone call that follows up that first phone call, then he already refused the phone call. So how do you understand this now? As far as this is concerned, the exchange, as is written here, whether or not it was this content as is written here, I don't have the awareness and recollection of this. I understand. And here, Mr. Edano said that I've also received a phone call from TEPCO. As far as the phone call with Mr. Edano was concerned, you contacted him before this? As I had mentioned earlier, I would contact the head of NISA and the METI minister, first of all. And my recollection, whether I had contacted the chief cabinet secretary at that time, I cannot recollect whether I had done so or not. I do apologize. And as far as that is concerned, what is being indicated here, whether it was the reality or not, I'm very sorry, I don't have the recollection, to be frank. As far as we are concerned, we have looked at documents from the Prime Minister's office, and it seems around 8 o'clock, and right before that, Mr. Edano, Chief Cabinet Secretary at that time, and METI Minister, there was this discussion that was held about the complete evacuation of all of the TEPCO employees. And it seems the Prime Minister's office was understanding that TEPCO had made a request that everyone would be evacuating. So therefore, that was refused. So therefore, the next phone call was not taken for that reason. But it seems as if there's a misunderstanding that was brought about with regard to Minister Kaeda and his understanding of the situation. Do you have any awareness of that? As I had mentioned earlier, it just leaves the persons who must remain to deal with the on-site situation. I do believe that I had relayed that this would be necessary, and this was the decision that was made and the guidance that was given. So therefore, I don't understand above and beyond that. So you did not say you will be leaving just a portion of the employees? I did not say all of them will be evacuating. Did you relay that a portion of your employees will be remaining there? As far as that is concerned, a portion of whether or not I had used these words or not, that's not something I'm very clear about. However, when we think about the situation then and the exchanges that took place, as far as evacuation is concerned, I did mention this, but whether a portion would be remaining, and whether I had said that, I don't have a clear recollection of that. I'm sure you're aware, during this period of time, on site, people were putting their lives on the line, and they were thinking very hard how many people need to remain, and they were, based on your instructions, trying to figure out how many people will be remaining. So they're thinking about this, and on the other hand, they need to be able to evacuate as many people as possible if they do not need to remain. And there's a lot of struggle, and they're trying to figure out how many people will remain till the very end. Is this really the right way to go about relaying this information? As I had mentioned in the beginning, including the general manager of the nuclear power plant, we would have a portion of our employees remain to deal with the situation, and that was our intention when we relayed this. So there might have been some misunderstanding that had occurred, but I had not intended for there to be such a misunderstanding. But I'm sure it depends on how one would relay this. But if you understand the feelings of the people there on site, at the very minimum, the necessary number will remain. So you needed to understand this and make the considerations necessary and relay this. Looking at this material, I do understand it as such, but at that time, to have a portion of the employees remain, and now, thereafter, we would have to consider what will happen if such and such transpired. So therefore, there will be modifications made but this was not something that we had relayed to them at that point. On the 15th, it's a new day, and at 9:20 something, it seemed as if the situation was contained. It was 9:22, but the situation became very severe. Venting could not be done, and the situation was becoming very dire. And you made another phone call to Minister Kaeda at that point. Is that correct? I do apologize. Where is it that you're referring to? Which page, please? On the 15th of March, 131. On the 15th, 131, with Minister Kaeda. You had called Minister Kaeda when the new day began. Is that correct or is that incorrect? Well, this is something that I don't clearly recollect, I must say. As far as Minister Kaeda is concerned, how many times have you spoken with him? I think it was that time, just that time that I had spoken to him within this timeline. Just once? Yes, I think it was just once. If that is the case, then on the 15th of March, you did not contact him. And vis-a-vis the aid of Minister Kaeda, it was not Minister Kaeda you spoke with, but his aide that you had spoken with. And as far as Minister Kaeda's understanding was concerned, his understanding was at 1800 hours and 41 minutes, so you didn't speak to the minister at all after that once. Yes, that's my recollection. 131, I don't have a recollection of this.
It seems that there are some missing memories on your part. We were trying the facts, and lots of facts have surfaced as a result. And there's a counterparty in a conversation, so we get testimony from the counterpart party before we are able to confirm what really took place. Mr. Edano came to NAIC and he said that just before the Prime Minister that there was a call from you, Mr. Shimizu, in regard to the withdrawal. Mr. Edano, the former Chief Cabinet Secretary, said that he only had a phone call with you once. Is that true? As for the communication with the Chief Cabinet Secretary, to be very, very honest with you, it's not in my memory. So I won't be able to say anything about what the facts were at that time. Fine. If you don't know what the facts were, then, well, to Mr. Edano, it was communicated that TEPCO has said that it was going to be a full withdrawal. And things have aggravated more and more. And if there is going to be a withdrawal, there would be no way to put a stop to further aggravation. But the president didn't respond to that, so that Mr. Edano said that Mr. Shimizu did not voice that some of the staffs would remain. You don't remember this either? No. As for what's written here, it's not in my memory. May I? We are listening to you, Mr. Shimizu, and it seems that you are explaining in the way that's easy to understand. Lots of things were happening at that time, and in the evening of the 14th, things have settled for some time, but then the issue of evacuation or the withdrawal, it's not withdrawal, but rather evacuation, was being discussed. But there were lots of frustration because the phones could not get through, as an example. It's true that the people at the site were ready to put their lives, and they were wondering how many people would be willing to remain at the site. And the top people at the site never crossed their mind that they would be leaving the site. This is something that I have confirmed with them, and they were discussing as who would remain at the site. This was the feeling on part of the site. And as the top of TEPCO at that time, how do you feel? And they felt whatever is the decision on part of the top management, we'll do what's necessary. That was the feeling on part of the site. Basically, it never crossed our mind that everybody would leave, even though that the power plant was in a very difficult situation. That was the position on part of the people at the site, and that was commonly shared as our understanding as well. But in looking at what's written here, let's hypothetically assume that if it was received as though some people at the power plants are going to run away, that would not be what I think is going to take place. And I would regret if some people even thought about that. And I would feel sorry to our staffs as well as the staffs of the affiliated companies. So I thought you would appreciate that you have that kind of staffs. But as the top management, there were lots of things that have not remained in your memory. And that's why I do hope that you would cherish the feeling of having that kind of employees and staffs with you. It's not that the higher you go, that things get worse, but the people at the site did have the determination as what they're going to do. I'm sorry for intervening. Well, the people at the site were doing their best, ready to put their life. And rather than what was in your mind, it is clear-cut and crystal clear that the people at the site had no intention whatsoever of leaving the power plant. But how it's communicated to the Prime Minister's office, it was communicated in a way that is being bashed by the public at large. I think that would be a very serious issue. It seems that did you have this feelings, the same feelings as that of the site when you were communicating with the Prime Minister's office? Well, let's put that aside for a minute. Well, the Prime Minister's office had an emergency meeting, and there was the so-called early morning meeting that was initiated by the Prime Minister. And there was a briefing before the Prime Minister was woken up. And then the politicians had the meetings, and Mr. Fuji and Mr. Matsumoto, those who were not there, were asked to come to convene the meeting. And what was in everybody's mind is that TEPCO was asking for the full withdrawal. And Prime Minister's office felt that TEPCO wanted to execute the full withdrawal, and the Prime Minister's office felt that they had to do something to put a stop. So it seems that what was being discussed at the Prime Minister's office is totally different from your intention, Mr. Shimizu. Well, at the Prime Minister's office, they have confirmed at the site. What's being said by the head office does not match with what's being said by the site, and this was being discussed, which means that the Prime Minister's office knew that the site had no intention of withdrawal, but the head office of TEPCO had spoken of withdrawal. So the Prime Minister's office had doubts as what is TEPCO's head office saying. even if the people at the site have no intention of leaving the power plants, but in the name of saving the lives, the head office of TEPCO was going to order on a compulsory basis that everybody had to leave. And you would be called upon, Mr. Shimizu, as the president. And what was your response when you were called? Are you asking me what happened after I was asked to go to the Prime Minister's office? Prime Minister Khan said to come to the Prime Minister's office immediately, and I went. Whether it is to the Chief Cabinet Secretary, METI Minister, and the Prime Ministers, they were seated, and Prime Minister had said two things, as I recall. One is as stated here. The question was asked whether people at the power plant intend to withdraw. And as I said repeatedly, to me, I have never used the word withdrawal. I only use the word evacuation. And it rang a bell in my mind that maybe the Prime Minister's office felt that they were considering that we might have the full withdrawal. So I responded, we are not intending to have a withdrawal. Then the Prime Minister said, oh, I see. I think that's what he said, as I recall. When Prime Minister Khan was here and was serving as a witness at NAIC, he said, I said to Mr. Shimizu, you would not be able to withdraw. And Mr. Shimizu said, I understand. That was the response by Mr. Shimizu. Mr. Shimizu had said that they would not be withdrawal, but he has not said it. When I said there won't be withdrawal, and he said, I haven't said that. And he didn't object to it, and he just said yes. Well, what is trying to get across in this conversation is that right now you say that you said to Prime Minister that we don't intend to withdraw, whereas the counterparty, Prime Minister Khan, when he was here at NAIC, had said, Prime Minister was the one who said you can't have a withdrawal, and Mr. Shimizu just responded, yes, sir. So it was not that there was a positive statement from Mr. Shimizu. Who is right in this?
As far as this is concerned, there was in the Budget Committee of the House of Councillors from April to May regarding this accident. There were questions that were being asked, and I also participated as a witness there. And as far as the Prime Minister's answer was concerned, as you had just read, that's what was said. And I said I was not considering that. And that's what I recall him having said. I was there as witness. So as far as what the Prime Minister said, I felt that he was relaying it as it was in a different committee as well. The same statement to the same effect was made, and that was my understanding. As far as we are concerned, we have looked at the records of all these committee meetings that you speak of, and on the 18th of April in 2011, it was closest to the accident period. And this was the statement that was made by Prime Minister Khan. There will not be a withdrawal. And President Shimizu said, of course, there would not be a withdrawal. And so therefore, at this point in time, Prime Minister Khan had said that from President Shimizu, there would not be a withdrawal. And recently, too, he spoke before our commission. And this was not just an acceptance, but Mr. Shimizu, the president, said that there would not be a withdrawal. Is that closer to the truth? Yes, that's what I had said. And in the committee meeting as well, I understand him saying that, and I understand it as such. It seems as if we are getting close to our allotted time, but may we please extend our session by 30 minutes? I do apologize. My questions are not being asked correctly, and I am taking more time than scheduled. And as far as the results are concerned, as far as this matter is concerned, all kinds of things are being said. But it seems, as far as this issue is concerned, there are very many lessons that need to be learned. And it seems to be that everything is converging on who said what, who didn't say what. So as far as our understanding and the arguments that we have and sorting out the arguments, I'd like to ask you some questions. As far as the reality is concerned, TEPCO and the withdrawal of all employees, as far as this matter is concerned, for them to all withdraw and to make it a situation where the control could not be done at all of the situation. That was not something that you had ever decided. That's correct. That's how we understand it. I'd like to confirm again. Then the worst case scenario that you had assumed when you were president, perhaps there might be a situation that might arise where everyone must withdraw. No, at that point, I did not consider that. I'd like to ask you then, as far as the containment vessel was concerned, there would be no choice but for it to explode. I'm sure you can imagine that occurring. Perhaps 1 hour from that point in time, that might occur, and great amounts of radioactive substances would leak out. And the site might contact you, but as far as the TEPCO president was concerned, you wanted to have the employees put their lives on the line and to deal with this situation. This is a hypothetical question, so it's a very difficult question to answer. It has to do with people's lives, in fact. And because it's hypothetical, I cannot give you a conclusion. However, if the worst case scenario is imagined and what will happen if everyone withdraws, you can imagine what could happen. However, you have to understand that people's lives are online. So TEPCO, we as operators, whether we can make this judgment or not, this is a very difficult issue to make a decision about. As far as this matter is concerned, there might have been a temporary withdrawal because we could have imagined such a thing occurring. That is the worst case scenario. So this is a very difficult question you're asking. It's very difficult to answer it clearly, specifically. As you had just mentioned, in fact, well, we've been confirming since earlier, as far as President Shimizu is concerned, you've contacted the Prime Minister's side very many times, and you didn't understand at that point in time what could happen from that point onwards. So therefore, you were not in a position to make your own decisions, and you wanted to consult with them. Is that not true? That's not the case at all. As I had mentioned since earlier, the great premise here is to make certain that our employees stay, but we're not consulting with them about that. I understand. Then, if complete withdrawal of the employees is not the case, then Prime Minister Khan, to put a stop to the complete withdrawal, he really didn't do this. Is that TEPCO's understanding? Prime Minister Khan had come to TEPCO thereafter, and including that as well. We've heard from the Prime Minister. And whether it be temporary. It was not something that would just be a withdrawal. That's our understanding. Then you didn't consider this even once. So if the Prime Minister put a stop to this withdrawal, which you didn't even consider, that's not the reality. Is that correct? Yes, I do understand it as such. Well, if that is the case, then there's been a lot of documents that we've looked through. And we've also looked at how the people on site had felt. And as far as the complete withdrawal of all employees, this was not something that was recommended by TEPCO. So at this point in time, Prime Minister Khan, having said that TEPCO had recommended a complete withdrawal and that the Prime Minister fulfilled a role to make certain this would not happen, that was not the case at all. Yes, that is my understanding. That is not the case at all. Well, then, I understand. I'd like to go on to the communication issue. On the 14th, if the worst case scenario should occur, were you trying to decide how to prepare for that? Or at that point in time, were you just consulting without imagining the worst case scenario? Which period are you referring to? The 14th until 9:22, there were frequent phone calls that were being made from yourself to the Prime Minister's office. And at that point, the criteria for withdrawal was not something that was decided upon at TEPCO. But when you imagined the worst case scenario, Unit 2 having a very dire situation occur and great amounts of radioactive substances being released, that was not something that was discussed, but you were talking about other matters? Well, rather than scenario, within our countermeasures headquarters, we were talking about the water level going down. And we were also talking about how the level will go even further down. And there was a likelihood of that. And as far as that scenario was concerned, that was something that was assumed as a possibility.
As I have repeated myself a number of times, and I apologize, but the people at the Fukushima Daiichi, as headed by the GM, Mr. Yoshida, were ready to put their lives. So you were not sharing that kind of assumption. Whether they were determined to put their lives, I knew that the situation was imminent. That's the understanding we did share. If things had been that situation, as was said earlier, at the time of the worst case scenario, the control of the site as well as saving the lives of the people, don't you think you should have consulted about these matters? It was a very imminent situation, and as I said earlier, the very fact that there were so many people at the power plants, and we started a discussion whether that was advisable or not. So I think it's slightly different from the way you phrase it. I would say at the Prime Minister's office, they felt that the first time consultation was to discuss the most critical situation in which they wanted to know, and they felt they were being consulted whether everybody is going to evacuate. Why is it that it was communicated in the way it was? I do apologize to recapitulate myself, but the grand premise in communicating with the Prime Minister's office is that some would remain. So you've talked about the worst case scenario. That's not the way we looked at it and addressed the situation. I see. On the 15th, whether it's at the Prime Minister or whether you communicated to METI Minister, you said you don't recall. Despite the fact that you've set the standards for the evacuation, you didn't communicate that to the Prime Minister's office? Whether it's the standards for evacuation There are procedures at the power plant. So it's a document that talks about the procedures at how to evacuate at the power plant. So it is only for the people at the site as how they should act. So I didn't think of communicating about this document. Okay, then on the 14th, what were you consulting with them? That some would leave and others would evacuate. When this was decided, then don't you think there was a need to inform them before the final decision? There came a time when some had to evacuate. I think it was a little after 6 o'clock the following day. At that time, of course, we did report to them. But in regard to the process and the procedures, we didn't give a report to the Prime Minister's office. Earlier, Mr. Shimizu was asked to be at the Prime Minister's office at 4:17. And up until that time, you were not aware of the standards for the evacuation. At this point, I did not see that document yet. So you had no understanding as how many would remain, but met the Prime Minister saying that not everybody is going to evacuate from the power plant. As for how many people and what their roles are going to be, was to be decided by the general manager of TEPCO when evacuation became necessary. So at this point, it was not yet the case that the actual number of people to leave the power plants was decided. Now, the Prime Minister's office, when you said different things to the Prime Minister's office, whether they misunderstood or whether it's because of the distrust towards TEPCO head office, they understood in the way they did, different ways and different views are possible. But through Mr. Hosono, Prime Minister himself received the call. And there were a number of times that he confirmed that there shan't be full withdrawal. You were the one, no, the Prime Minister's office knew that not everybody would leave from the site, but why was it that they were confirming so many times in the way they did? There would be no way for me to say, but I don't know what to say, because the Prime Minister's office don't really believe it. Why do you think that the Prime Minister's office have lost the trust towards you after the accidents? Whether the Prime Minister's office lost the trust towards us or not is a matter of how one views this, but not limited to the Prime Minister's office. Events, whether they were communicated precisely, accurately, and timely, is an issue because there was a loss of power, there was difficulty in communication, and there were times where it was difficult to grasp the prevailing situation. As a result, information was not communicated to the Prime Minister's side on a timely basis, and that could have been one of the reasons. Well, at NAIC, Mr. Kaeda, who was the METI minister at that time, whether it was the delay in the venting or the injection of the salt water, he was saying that they have lost the trust towards TEPCO from the earlier timing. So at the earlier timing, it was the president's responsibility to have strong, trustworthy relationship with the Prime Minister's office. Yes. we have the basic communication channel as an operator with NISA, and that's the basic channel. And from NISA, they are to communicate to the Prime Minister's office. And I think that is the reasonable route of communication. But you did send Dr. Takeguro to the Prime Minister's office, and you could have tried to improve the communication using Mr. Takeguro. Mr. Takeguro is a one that sent from TEPCO to communicate the technical issues. But I was told by him that it was difficult to communicate through the phones, and information was not passed on too well. Mr. Takeguro went back to the TEPCO head office at one point and told to the top management of TEPCO as well as to the staffs, and has given his evaluation. What did he say? What did he say? I was not there myself. I wouldn't be able to provide a comment. Mr. Takeguro commented about the Prime Minister's office and that Prime Minister is very irritated. And he also said that he looks somewhat childish. Should there have been these statements from Mr. Takeguro, how would you have felt, Mr. Shimizu? Well, it was not that I met the person at that time, so I wouldn't want to make a comment. It seems that there was much distrust towards TEPCO from the side of the Prime Minister's office, and TEPCO also had deminimized the evaluation towards the Prime Minister's office on the other, and maybe that could have been the reason for not necessarily the best possible communication. That's my impression.
As far as this withdrawal issue is concerned, I do believe that it is an even larger issue. The Prime Minister's side talked to Mr. Yoshida and was able to understand that not everyone will be withdrawing. And why was it that this was being discussed to the extent that it was? It seems as if there was maybe a concern that TEPCO head office might be telling them to completely withdraw, or because there was a different decision that might be made, and the situation might become even more dire and radioactive substances might be released, and what sort of response needs to be put together. If it is a company issue, then there was miscommunication that had occurred. And you were saying, not just on site, but on the head office side as well, you've never considered complete withdrawal. Then why was it that this was such a major issue at that time? In your statement as well, I think we have the common understanding. There was a hotline that was set up directly with the Prime Minister's side, and the direct orders would be followed, and this sort of situation had arisen rather than acting under the Nuclear Emergency Response Act. I do believe it's exactly as you said. And this sort of situation arising, there was an issue regarding that. But as was mentioned earlier, as far as the technical matter of controlling the reactor, injecting seawater, or following the procedures for Unit 2, the intentions and the recommendations of the on-site people were ignored, and you followed the Prime Minister's directions. As far as the seawater injection and the interruption of that is concerned, the general manager of the nuclear power plant would be making that decision. But Mr. Takeguro, of course, made his decisions. And in a short period of time, we decided that we would approve that. So therefore, as far as what you're saying, Mr. Nomura, communication was not something that was completely adequate. In fact, it was insufficient, we must admit. Let's say, for example, if the Prime Minister's side said the head office has not recommended a complete withdrawal, then how we would respond in terms of an emergency arising. We wanted to have the Prime Minister's side put together their conclusions, and if that is the discussion that was held, this was not decided, but perhaps it needed to be decided. I'm not in the position to appraise that. As I had mentioned earlier, it was a very urgent situation. What needed to be done? We can only think about it in assumptions. How can we appraise the situation and what needs to be done vis-a-vis the situation? Rules, procedures, and way of doing things. There is a difficulty sometimes to do things according to those. TEPCO did not see that worst-case scenario happening. So therefore, TEPCO finds itself in this position today where you have not decided what needs to be done. You're still in that position at TEPCO. However, as far as the decision that was made, that was Prime Minister Kan who had made a decision. No matter what happens, he made a decision saying that there would not be a complete withdrawal of the employees. And when he went to the head office of TEPCO, he made a statement to that effect. Did you receive this as a correct statement? When Prime Minister Kan came to TEPCO's emergency countermeasures headquarters and had his conversation with us and made his statements, the way we received it, we felt that he was very strong in the words he used. If there is withdrawal, then TEPCO will 100% collapse as a company. And for those executives who are over 60 years old, they need to go to the site and put their lives on the line. I do recall he had said that as well. Mr. Nomura, I don't understand it, that such criteria was set up, but as far as what the Prime Minister had said, I do understand those were the words that he had said. And the impression that I had received, if I'm to share that with you, having heard what he had to say, was that he used very harsh words and talked to us all. And especially for those employees who were putting their lives on the line and working on site, so many of them, not only TEPCO people, but the affiliated company people, Fukushima Daiichi, Fukushima Daini, and Kashiwazaki Kariwa people, for these people on site, they might get a feeling that they're really being somehow attacked. and devastated as a result of that. I understand your impression, but Prime Minister Khan had come and said after he spoke very harshly, he went to a different room and spoke to the chairman and the president and Mr. Muto. And Prime Minister Khan had given further instructions, and there were further preparations that were being made. We've looked at the video, and there were all kinds of technical preparations being made to make certain that video conferences could be made. What happened then? Prime Minister Khan and ourselves, we were in that small meeting room, and there was a report we were receiving regarding the current situation at that time. Unit 2. There was an explosion that was heard, and there was quite a lot of vibration that was felt. And it was a very urgent situation that had arisen as a result of that. And as far as the nuclear power plant and the situation there was concerned, in the meeting room we were at, there was a common TV conference system that was set up, so we were able to see that very urgent situation on site. And we went immediately to the emergency response headquarters, and we decided to carry out our response. So therefore, Unit 4's hydrogen explosion and Unit 2's loud explosion sound was at the same time. Unit 4 explosion, that's what it was, and we found that out. At that point, there is also another sound at Unit 2, but at the very least, Unit 4, there was a hydrogen explosion that had taken place, so it's a very urgent situation. And at that point in time, you were providing encouragement to the people on site. Mr. Yoshida is there in the video, and the others who were working very hard, they were listening to what Prime Minister Khan had to say. They were dealing with the situation. There was this loud sound that they heard, so they put their helmets on right away, and they immediately moved toward the area that they need to move toward. And for matters that were not considered, if the Prime Minister continues to speak about these matters, perhaps that was not necessary for him to do so. Do you think so?
Whether it was unnecessary or not, what is more important is that in regard to the withdrawal, as has been said, I went to the Prime Minister's residence and said it was not a withdrawal and there won't be a withdrawal. I thought Prime Minister understood that TEPCO does not intend to withdraw. So at the emergency counter headquarters of TEPCO, I felt uneasy when Prime Minister voiced what he did. That's what all the people from TEPCO would say. But if we look at the root cause, there are reasons on part of you, Mr. President. The way you communicated was not the most appropriate, and as you have rightly said, if you had said to Prime Minister Khan, and you thought that he understood, but he didn't. So you need to have had a better communication with the Prime Minister. And because you didn't, Prime Minister himself gave his talk despite the urgent environment. And the people at the site had no choice but to watch the TV for some time. That was brought forth because there was an issue in which how TEPCO has communicated to the Prime Minister's side. Isn't that how you feel? This is linked to what's been said for some time. Our intention was, without doubt, that some people would remain, without doubt. And that was the intent as we communicated. It seems that there is some misunderstanding between what we said and what was understood by the receiving side. So maybe there had been room to better communicate if I look back. I see. In regard to the full withdrawal, we would like to further give you a position. Prime Minister said that no full withdrawal would be allowed because it is only the operators who are in the position to be able to control the reactor at the very end. And despite that, the government, rather than the operator, would say and provide their advice that our advice is better. Or at times, the government or the Prime Minister might go to the site and speak as though they are going to be engaged in an activity to control the reactor together with the operator, which is somewhat confusing. If there is room for the operator to have the withdrawal, then you need to send somebody else to replace the operators. But the Prime Minister's side felt that they have no choice but to ask the operators to tend to the reactors till the very end. It's not that I had such a precise understanding myself, but the logic is, as you say, unless there is a group to replace the people at TEPCO at the site, there won't be withdrawal. You are right. So at the very end, if you're going to leave the matter in the hands of the people at the site, the Prime Minister's side should not direct. For example, there should be venting or injection of the water. Do you agree? The people who understand the site the most, the actual situation, the facilities, would be the general manager of the power plant and other staffs at the general power plant. And they should be the one to take the necessary action. That's the very basics. But having said that, depending upon the situation, there could be some technical advice or there could be some support, which are both indispensable. Thus, whether it's at the head office of TEPCO or the expert from the government side, support is something that is needed. Of course, there would be support from those who have the expertise. That's good. But as you said earlier, based upon the Nuclear Energy Response Act, since the head of the emergency response headquarters has said something, you feel that you need to give due regard. Thus, in terms of priority, there are a number of events, but there was something that the people at the site wanted to do so. But you had to do something different because you had to give due regards to the wishes on part of the Prime Minister's side. Don't you think that's dangerous? It would depend upon what event, but basically, it is not something that's desirable. Last question. If you look at the examples overseas, I would say it's true for all the cases, but they would have a place within the site, like a shelter, which is more appropriate for evacuation. And such evacuation shelters are available at the nuclear power plants. Should there be such evacuation shelter, whether you need to relocate to Daini or not, it could have been that you didn't have to sway your decision too much. And for those who are going to put their lives, even if they are going to do so, the maximum possible countermeasures to save their lives should have been placed. Don't you think that was lacking or was not sufficient? Rather than to say it was not sufficient, the situation was urgent, and we need to consider a difficult situation and to have a shelter in place. We were not ready to think about that. One of the lessons learned from this is that there would be important base isolation building at the power plant. in which at the time of Chuetsu earthquake, Kashiwazaki Kariya power plants were partially impaired. And they have built a shelter like that. And even if the level of radiation is high, inside the building is protected. And if that had not been in place, I wouldn't even want to think about it. But as for the shelter tantamount to what was there as a safety measure, I think it is one of the things to be considered, probably, but I think we would like to give more thoughts. In a severe accident, what are the countermeasures you need to consider against that? Accident management. What about severe accident? Severe accident countermeasures may be the word to be used, but for these severe accident measures, for the government body who was going to implement this, which organization was negotiating, voicing their opposition? I don't understand that the organization was opposing this. As you've said at the outset, maybe you are referring to the Federation of Electric Power Companies, but it's important and an important challenge that we need to be able to address the severe accidents. And we had no intention of putting pressures or to make it not what it should be. But I think there was awareness on part of the government who wanted to strengthen the measures. And the Safety Commission wanted to have more severe accident countermeasures in place. And NISA was about to consider these measures to be implemented. However, the group of the operators, the Federation of Electric Power Companies, has said that this would impose excessive expenditures, so that they wanted the measures to be more lenient. And they have taken action so that more lenient measures would be adopted. Do you think this is the right approach to the negotiation as the management? I don't think we intended to have lenient measures because we were afraid of the excessive investment. But rather, what's important is that you need to look at the facilities in place before you consider what safety measures would need to be introduced. And that was the perspective that the Federation of Electric Power Companies were exchanging opinions with the government body. And I think it's important to have such a dialogue.
As far as this sort of situation not having been assumed, but in the future, there might be other considerations made for the provisioning of shelters or areas where the employees would be able to withdraw or evacuate to. And as far as the representative of that electric power company is concerned, putting aside whether it was your judgment or not, that the Federation of Electric Power Companies was very much in opposition to this legislation that was put together. How do you feel about this, President Shimizu? This will be a repeat of what I had said. I don't think that I have the awareness that we were resisting the legislation that was put together. In fact, we were looking into we were not looking into deregulation either, or easing of the regulations. That was not our awareness. Earlier, Prime Minister Khan went to the TEPCO head office and had spoken to the employees, and he said many people who were working on site were very pained. The severe accident countermeasures would have been countermeasures to protect the lives of those people putting their lives on the line. Perhaps there could have been more consideration paid to these, and in doing so, they would be able to escape from that very severe situation, and they would be able to somehow control the reactor at the same time. Even if you say you were thinking about the people on site, it seems to us that you are taking them very lightly, the people on the site, putting their lives on the line. For those people working at the nuclear power plant and making light of their situation, predicament, we're not doing that at all. Of course, this has to do with persons and their lives, and there need to be protective countermeasures. Of course, this is a very important point. You also talked about the provisioning of shelters. And that type of response is not something that I'm fully aware of what's being considered right now, but to respect people's lives and to come up with the policy that will assure their safety and assure their health. We have to think about this based upon our experience and come up with the necessary facilities and come up with the necessary countermeasures to provide for this. If you can't protect the lives of the people who are working on site, you really can't protect the lives of the residents in the area. Theoretically, this is correct. So therefore, you have to show the posture where you're thinking seriously about the lives of your employees on the front line. And at the same time, you can think seriously about the lives of the residents of this area. So therefore, look back to the past and come up with the countermeasures necessary to make certain that happens. And with regard to the confusion pertaining to the withdrawal matter, this is something we're going to be discussing further amongst ourselves and the Commission and coming up with our conclusions. So no one was thinking about the withdrawal, complete withdrawal of employees from the nuclear power plant. If that is the case, then it's not because we believe your statement, Mr. President, but because the people on site had this willingness and desire to remain on the site. So therefore, we need to think most important, the people who are working on site, on the front lines, and come up with the necessary policy. It seems our time has come. I'm sure there are very many questions that still need to be asked. However, we have reached our time limit. As far as this session is concerned, this will be recorded for posterity. President Shimizu said that this needed to be done. You understand, but it was not done. And this brings into question whether TEPCO, as this great electric power company, needed to consider this. The eyes of the world are upon you, and they are appraising your situation. Please understand that the trust that is placed in your company is shaken as a result of this. Our time has come. Thank you very much for your cooperation today, Mr. Shimizu. It hasn't completely ended, though. Mr. Shimizu is leaving the room. Well, as far as our next commission meeting is concerned, on the 9th of June, here in our meeting room, we will have a discussion about our conclusions as well as present on the evacuees survey and the results of that survey. Thank you very much for attending.
それでは、お待たせ。
Thank you very much for waiting, ladies and gentlemen. The time has come, and we'd like to convene the press conference. First of all, I'd like to ask the chairman, Dr. Kurokawa, to brief us in regard to the discussions that took place at the Commission. We had invited Mr. Masataka Shimizu, who was the former president, representative director of TEPCO. And Dr. Kurokawa would start presenting his comments and to entertain questions thereafter. Dr. Kurokawa, please. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We have invited Mr. Shimizu, who was the president at the time of the accident, as a witness. I'm sure you must have thought of different things, and things have crossed your mind as you listen to this, but I think it could be summarized into the following. From having heard the witness, Mr. Shimizu, we were listening to the decision-making process of TEPCO immediately after the accident on site. Mr. Shimizu, upon his return from the business trip, felt that he was not realizing that there was distrust from the Prime Minister's side in regard to the venting issue of TEPCO. Whether the full withdrawal was contemplated or not, there was misunderstanding and between the Prime Minister's side and TEPCO. In other words, there have been gaps in the understanding on part of the TEPCO side vis-a-vis the Prime Minister's side, and due to the lack of trust towards each other, it has resulted in a miscommunication, which has resulted in major gaps in the statement made by the both sides. During this time, the site was endeavoring to resolve the issues of the reactor. They were doing their utmost, and they never even thought of the withdrawal, which became apparent not only during today's testimony, but in regard to other investigation that NAIC has conducted. As long as we look at this example, in regard to the nuclear power plants, which is at a critical situation, it is only the people at the site who are versed with the reactor. And the people at the site had the strong mission that they were never going to leave the site. As in the example of the injection of the seawater, the people who are at the site and have the technical expertise should be making the decision, and it should not be the case that you give due regard to the position on part of the Prime Minister's side. Because if we are to face more serious condition, it is important that the operators would not be intervened by those who are not versed with the expertise. For the severe accident, there's the importance of having base isolation building, and Mr. Shimizu said that if there were no building, it would be quite scary on his part, as he stated. However, in the future, it is not just sufficient to address the events that have occurred, but rather to premise oneself that there could be more severe situation as preparations are to be made, which was something that was confirmed. In addition, from the purpose of defending the lives of the people, you need to be able to assure the safety of the staffs who are working at the site, because this is crucial to protect the lives of the general public. This is the summary for today, and tomorrow I would like to say that there has been a questionnaire that we've carried out to those who have suffered from this accident, and we'd like to share the results as well as other findings that have come up apparent. So tomorrow will be the second round to compile some of the tentative conclusions. Thank you.
We'd like to have your questions asked. If you could raise your hand and say your name and your company name, we will give you the microphone. The gentleman in the middle from abroad, the foreign media individual, please.
Dr. Kurokawa, well, I was surprised to see that today in the questioning there were not much known about the tsunami and the preparation that TEPCO should have undertaken to protect, and that the steps which were adopted were not accurate. And therefore, why haven't the Commission today talked more about the tsunami issue and the protection where TEPCO showed a lack of responsibility?
Thank you for your question. 皆さん通訳はないんだね。どうして
Well, why was it that the tsunami question was not asked by the Commission so much? Is that correct? That's your question. Well, there are several reasons. Several times in our Commission meeting, we have asked questions regarding tsunami protection vis-a-vis several of the witnesses. We've also had our own investigation into this matter, and this will be included in our report. If you would be so kind as to await those results, would that be a good answer to your question? Thank you very much. The lady in the middle, please.
In the very front row, Mori from Asahi Shimbun. I have a number of questions. I'd like to confirm as what you said at the outset. With the lack of trust, this has resulted in the misunderstanding in communication. The Commission's position is that Mr. Shimizu had some issues in how he communicated. Is that the understanding on part of the Commission? You heard what you heard from Mr. Shimizu, and it seems that Mr. Shimizu has said so. I have two more points. As for the invitation of the witnesses, is today the last? Mr. Nomura in Fukushima has said that NAIC is different, in which we can hold people responsible, which is different from the case of the investigation committee on the accident at Fukushima nuclear power station of TEPCO and investigation on Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. So in what way do you believe you can do so? I believe that's a question that I have been responding every time. We have been entrusted by the Diet. So it's not us who makes the final decision, but it rests with the members of the Diet. I do understand, but you can make a proposal in the report. I think it depends on how you do it. Whether we say so or not is something that we need to give further thoughts. Thank you.
Well then, the gentleman there, please. Fujita, freelance reporter. Today, this was discussed several times. In the questions asked in the House of Councilors and the statement that was made was there's a lot of discrepancy between what Mr. Shimizu had to say and what was said earlier. As far as that matter is concerned, perhaps there's been video or audio recording at the Prime Minister's office or residence, but there was not, and there's no record that was kept, it seems, and that is the issue. But the Prime Minister's office and residence, they're not touching upon that. Whether it be Mr. Edano, Mr. Khan, they were saying that they were trying their best. So that seems to be where our ailment resides. If you could please give us your personal opinion as the chairman of this commission. I think this has to do with the governance issue, ABC. This is issue A. So therefore, there should be memos and there should be records. This matter needs to be sorted out. Maybe they're just giving an excuse, and maybe they need to share this with the media and the people of our country. Yes, please, then. The front row person, the fourth person, please.
Thank you very much. Okonogi from Asahi. 2 questions. One question pertains to the fact that you have asked Mr. Shimizu, and I'm sure it is thanks to the enormous efforts that you have exerted, Dr. Kurokawa, as the chair of NAIC. On the slide, it showed in details as to the conversation that took place at the site, which was part of the questions raised. The fact that you were able to grasp what took place at the site as accurately as was depicted today, is it because that not only to Mr. Yoshida, the general manager, but to the top management at the site, is it the result of the hearing and the interview that you have carried out to come up with the points that we saw in the slide? If not, what were the methods to listen to their comments and opinions? And whether it's Mr. Yoshida or the top management at the site, what did they say about the evacuation? It said minimum of 10 people would remain so that others would leave. Maybe there was no mention of full withdrawal, but maybe there was a scenario to leave just 10 people. So then you could not say that there was no plan for evacuation. So I'd like to draw your comments on those. We are carrying out investigations in different ways, and to the extent possible, we try not to resort to hearsay, but to have the concrete facts as much as possible. Thus, we were able to interview Mr. Yoshida, although it was just a little over 1 hour. And based upon that, it seems that there was a high level of mission, the sense of mission and motivation of the people at the site, which I'd like to share.
Please. Miyajima from monthly magazine Factor. Dr. Nomura had a very good goal in mind. I feel he looked over his questions that had been asked. And I felt very grateful that the people in the front line were working very hard and utilizing their expertise. General Manager Yoshida, or somebody who is of his rank and position, we need to have someone like that come to the commission session and speak, because the eyes of the people of the country and the eyes of the world are upon you. And this is a very important thing to do. Is this something that's considered, or have you just ended Mr. Yoshida's questions, or are you thinking of inviting him to your session? Well, this is a very grateful comment. We only have so much time to do this much, and this is the first step in our process. If you would be so kind as to understand that that is the fact. And this is the first time in our constitutional government history that we're doing this. And so universally, we're going to have this kind of process unfolding. As you had rightly mentioned, the more we do these sessions, the more we want to know about many more things. And members of our commission also have a lot of frustration that they are espousing. So it's very important to continue that mandate. And how much of a desire is on the part of the people and the Diet to have that happen. The gentleman in the middle, please, with the blue shirt.
Very much. I apologize. I'm going to ask a question in English again. Shimizu, former President Shimizu was recently appointed to be an outside board member of Fuji Oil Company, which is a subsidiary of a listed company, AOC Holdings. Do you think he's being rewarded for failure?
Fighting for what?
I'm asking, is he being...
こうぞ、清水さんは今度
Mr. Shimizu is going to be the independent director of a certain company, and the question is whether it was a reward for a failure.
Failing in his duties as TEPCO president.
I have no position to comment on that.
can I then just follow up and ask, do you think that the appointment suggests that Prime Minister Khan was right last time when he spoke and talked about the strength of the nuclear village? This type of thing, would that be an example of their abiding power, the abiding power of the nuclear village?
菅さんが正しい
The question was whether Mr. Khan was right in what he said. Can I respond to you in Japanese? We are carrying out different investigations, and as was said earlier, to the extent possible, we would like to have as much facts as possible in raising the questions, but that takes time. But in that sense, we have asked Mr. Shimizu to be here, and I wonder what's the judgment that you've made listening to Mr. Shimizu. That's something I don't know what runs in your mind at the moment. But we try to avoid the value judgment as much as possible as the Commission.
one from another. So just facts based and make だと思います。
はい、ありがとうございます。3人目が手を挙がってますので。
Another person from the foreign media, please, the third individual in the back.
Mr. Shimizu today said again and again, honestly, that's what he said in English translation, honestly, and then he said he didn't remember. Now, I asked you this question before. If you could have made him testify under oath, would you have found out more? And in general, looking back on all these testifying people, do you think it was a pity you couldn't make them testify under oath? Thank you.
はい、Thank you for your comment. これはだから言ったときに嘘を
Well, would it be all right to say a lie? And would it be possible to have them testify under oath? We don't have this system. This is like the third question. And this was asked by a foreign individual as well. And I said this. When we were told to do this commission meeting, I asked, is there anything under oath that we can do? If you could please look at this report, and you can look at how the Diet members and the people of the country and the media would be making their judgment. I have a feeling that it's not really our commission's matter to decide. But whether this process is something where justice is being served or not.
一番端の方。
Shizume from Kyoto. I have two questions. The first question is that I like to invite your impressions or comments. In the Q&A session, I think you were able to pursue, do you feel you were able to pursue the issue of the evacuation fully? I think it depends on how you felt. I was asked similar question in the past, and there are lots of investigation. I think it was asked by Otsuka-san, and lots of reports have been issued, and lots of video interviews are in place. But whether books or whatever, or the interview of this and that person, who said what really? It's the writer who sets up the context. So depending upon what was the thought of the writer, it would differ. Thus, I would want the people who are responsible to be here and to be invited to speak in front of you as much as possible. As was said earlier, we don't want to make a judgment. We like to come up with as much facts as possible. Mr. Nomura was raising the question. It was only once that the chair yourself intervened and asked a question. And when Mr. Shimizu kept repeating, he doesn't remember. And he doesn't recall. What did you want to say? No, because you sort of sounded as though whether that's the right attitude as the top management of the company. That's what I felt, and that's what I said. As for the people who are here, there are lots of people who have said they don't recall. And there have been other witnesses in which I've commented, your memory doesn't seem to be too good. So it's not going to be under oath in Japan, but I wonder what's your judgment call? The people at the site were ready to put their lives. But as the president, no, as I said, it's up to you, gentlemen and ladies of the press, as how you would feel. You felt that he was irresponsible. That's going to be my judgment. Rather than my judgment, it's for you to make the judgment.
Thank you. The person in the middle with the shirt. Kamide, freelance reporter. I'd like to ask a few simple questions. Oi nuclear power plant, the answer has already been concluded, perhaps. But here, perhaps they should decide based on your decision that is put forward by the NAIC, but it seems as if it might happen before that. And I'm wondering how you are considering this. This is a timely issue, how you see this. And the Asahi lady had talked about this as well. To what extent can you pursue individual responsibility? The judgment might be made by the Diet, but as chair, Mr. Kurokawa, maybe there is the reality where you can prosecute the individual. Are you considering that possibility depending upon your conclusions? First of all, as far as Oi nuclear power plant is concerned and what will happen there, that's not something that I am specifically concerned with. But looking at the commission and the proceedings, of course, you're looking into this as well. It's 15 months since the accident had happened. What we want to say as a commission, we can only share with you what we know. But we think about an industrialized nation in the world. It seems as if our country is going in a different direction from that. And if that is the case, then what sort of process is being implemented here? It has to do with the trust of the nation, whether trust can be placed in us. Everyone is looking at us, and meltdown might still be going on. And I can't really understand why just these matters are being discussed. And this is the Diet that had asked us to set up this independent commission, and what will happen with the regulating authority that will be set up. That's something that needs to be done in a steadfast manner. So therefore, an independent investigation and the results of that needs to be looked at. And as far as the process, that's not something I can understand because we are the legislative branch and we don't understand quite what the executive branch is trying to do.
Personally, as I said, it's your judgment rather than my personal judgment. And as the chair, we like to be writing about the facts as much as possible without injecting much judgment calls. The gentleman in the middle, Okano from Mainichi. At the outset, when you did the summary, there's something I'd like to confirm. TEPCO did not have the intention of carrying out the full withdrawal. Is that correct, as I understand your summary? Our understanding is that TEPCO has always used the word evacuation. There's a difference in connotation between the word evacuation and withdrawal. So the people at TEPCO has been using evacuation, and as was said, I wonder where and why the miscommunication took place. As said earlier, we like to clarify the facts as possible to minimize that, but there is a limit to how much we can do. In order to discuss the miscommunication, you need to specify what was the understanding on part of TEPCO to start with, and I'd like to confirm about that. So that may be the part which is different, whether one is under oath or not. And it may be something that's going to be taken up by a different body. Don't you think so? It may be the legal branch that is to do so. We are not trained to do so, I think, because it's division of power between the three bodies. Just another point. The word miscommunication was mentioned. And I hate to repeat this, but TEPCO basically did not use the word withdrawal. But as an intention, whether they wanted to withdraw or not, what was the basis in you saying so? Whether you hear from the TEPCO people or whether you interview other people, TEPCO has never used the word withdrawal from the start. And when we interviewed Mr. Yoshida, he didn't even thought about withdrawal, but the only thing they considered is evacuation, in which on a temporary basis, of course, the fireman or the fire person will not go and jump into the fire, so they might evacuate for a temporary time. And evacuation must be the word that is commonly used at the company. And Mr. Yoshida also used the same word. Should there be another earthquake, another tsunami, they might have to consider a temporary evacuation. That's how they considered at the very forefront. So that could have been one of the reasons for miscommunication. And in order to confirm this, they didn't reconfirm or restate to make sure that the other party has understood. When something important is said, that's how you do it. But
We don't have very much time left, so two more people. The third gentleman, please, in the front row. Shimada, freelance reporter. Regarding miscommunication, Mr. Edano and Mr. Shimizu as well. It seems as if there's an acknowledgement after having heard something once, but there's not a confirmation that's made once again, and they just go with it. And to think it's okay after just hearing it once, is that in fact the right way to confirm things? That's the good question that needs to be asked for the person who is in a responsible position when they need to do something. If they are trying to avoid something, then they don't have that practice, perhaps, maybe to confirm and double confirm and so on. Because maybe the people on site do that kind of confirmation time and again, but the people in the upper echelons don't do it as much, perhaps.
the very last question. Kino, a freelance journalist. In regard to the resumption of the operation of OI, there was an announcement at the Prime Minister's residence that OI is going to resume its operation. Is it going to be possible to safeguard the operators at OI power plant? Because it was said before that it is important to do so. But nothing has changed at the site. About the resumption of the operation has been decided. So at this point, is it going to be possible to safeguard these operators at the site at OI? That's the first question. And the second question pertaining to interview of Mr. Yoshida. Did you interview Mr. Yoshida? Yes, I was able to converse directly with Mr. Yoshida, the GM of the power plant. Now, the resumption of the power plant is not for me to comment. You are the ones to evaluate or to criticize, but we did have the Mr. Fukano from NISA who came as a witness, and that's one of the reasons we asked him to be here, to serve as a witness. With this, this document, if you are interested, we'll try to do it as soon as possible and post it on the website tomorrow. And tomorrow at this NAIC, we are going to have the session to summarize some of the tentative conclusion. Once again, I do hope that many of you would join us for the 19th session, which is to take place tomorrow. Once again, thank you for your presence, ladies and gentlemen.